I didn't hear a bark. I saw a smile that didn't belong on a hungry face. Aurelian I, a 7-month-old German Shepherd puppy, stood at the doorway in Manhattan rain, his head tilted just enough to look curious, but not threatening. Eyes following plates of food being carried past as if they were little boats. He would never get to board. He didn't push forward, didn't whine, didn't beg. He simply waited in silence, smiling the way only a dog who has learned to apologize for existing can. People like to say friendly means a golden retriever wagging his tail, or a Labrador bounding with muddy paws, maybe a French Bulldog in a designer sweater trotting behind his owner on the Upper East Side. But this German Shepherd puppy showed his friendliness by being invisible, by trying to make himself so small that no one could object to his presence. One ear was crusted and bent wrong, an old wound that hadn't healed right, and his coat was the color of the city when the subway screeches into the station. Dark, dusty, with streaks that tried and failed to shine. I'm Marcus, 38, born and raised in New York. And I'll be honest, I almost walked past him. Almost. That's what hurts me the most now, knowing how close I came to becoming just another pair of shoes that ignored him. But something in that smile stopped me. I crouched in the rain, held out a hand that shook more than I wanted it to. He didn't move closer. He only lifted his chin and smiled harder, as if to say, I know I'm not welcome. Don't worry. I'll stay here. I'll just watch. The rain fell harder, smacking the brass kickplate of the door, while yellow taxi lights rippled through the puddle gathering at his paws. My voice came out softer than I expected. Buddy, I see you. And in that moment, I knew he understood. Then the door swung open, heat and garlic and laughter spilling out, the manager frowning at me. Sir, please, no dogs at the entrance. I nodded, stood, and the German Shepherd puppy took a respectful step back, polite, even in hunger. I left because they asked me to, but I couldn't leave completely. Over my shoulder, I said it to the storm. To him, maybe to myself, I'm coming back tomorrow. The city blinked with neon and rain, but he didn't move. He just kept smiling, that impossible smile. I showed up earlier than the city itself seemed ready to wake, because sleep never really came. The rain was lighter, more of a mist than a storm now, but the doorway looked the same, and so did he. The same German Shepherd puppy. The same impossible smile that tries to make you feel okay about failing him. But this time, he wasn't alone. A man in a faded city maintenance jacket leaned against the trash bins, steam curling from a paper cup of tea that smelled faintly of mint. His eyes followed mine. You looking for him? He asked. His voice was rough but kind. Name's Milo, night janitor. Been slipping him scraps when I can, but he needs more than scraps. Needs a doctor. Skin's bad. That ear? He shook his head. Smells wrong. I knelt, ignoring the damp seeping through my jeans. The German Shepherd puppy flinched at first, shoulders tense like the world had taught him that hands might hurt. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and pressed his nose against my wrist, sniffing like he was reading a secret written just for him. Milo watched. He won't push in. He knows the door is not for him. Smart dog. Too smart for this life. The restaurant door cracked open again, and a sharp voice drifted out. Sir, please don't feed the dog here. Milo's jaw tightened. We're not making a mess. We're making a friend. I tugged my hood up against the drizzle. My old Patagonia jacket had been through 100 storms, and now it felt like armor as I pulled a leash from my pocket. Not a tight one, not a trap, just a loop of trust. If he were mine, I said, he'd have a name. Milo raised his brows. So give him one. The leash hung open in my hand. The German Shepherd puppy hesitated, took one long breath, and then slipped his nose through, like he'd made a decision bigger than both of us. He stepped in so close I could feel the tremors shaking out of his body. My throat tightened. Aurelian, I whispered. Ari. The doorman cleared his throat behind me, impatient. Hey. But before he could finish, I scooped Ari into my arms, damp, trembling but not fighting. He pressed against me, his good ear brushing my cheek, as if he'd been waiting for this all along. I held him tighter than I meant to. We're going to a clinic, I promised. Tonight. My voice came out steady, like I had everything under control. But inside, my stomach sank with the weight of the truth. My heart said, yes. My bank account whispered, no. Could I really afford what he needed? Or had I just made a promise I couldn't keep? The emergency vet lobby was warm in that strange artificial way hospitals always are. Sterile air tinged with disinfectant, the faint bitterness of burned coffee from a machine that had probably been running all night, and the quiet hum of people trying to hold their hope together in plastic chairs. Ori, the German Shepherd puppy who had smiled his way through hunger, curled against my shin like we had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, even though it was the first time he'd ever leaned on me. His body pressed close, damp fur leaving a dark mark on my jeans, and I felt every tremor travel up through my bones. Etek crouched beside us, lifting the injured ear only Milame, no more, and whispered, "We'll be gentle." Her eyes flicked up to mine, reading the panic I was trying hard not to show. I cleared my throat. He's been outside God knows how long. There's skin disease across his shoulders and the ear. I stopped, my voice breaking under the weight of it. The ear is bad. The vet nodded with the calm certainty of someone who had seen too much. We can help, but I want you to be ready. We might need to clean more aggressively. Possibly a partial procedure on the ear to stop the rot. Nothing graphic. He'll be comfortable. Our goal is to give him a future where doorways aren't the only places he waits. Behind me, Milo shuffled, clutching his damp hat like a prayer. "I can help with food," he murmured, "but not the big bills." I looked down at Ori. His chest rose and fell too fast. Not from fear. It felt like readiness, as if he'd already made his peace with whatever came next. I pressed my palm against him. "I'll adopt him," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "We'll do the paperwork with the city shelter. He's not a stray at the door anymore. He's coming home." The vet's lips softened into a tired smile, the kind you give when you hear something you needed more than the patient did. "All right, we'll start with labs, pain relief, and meds for the skin. If his temperature spikes, we operate tonight." Ori lifted his eyes then, and the smile that didn't belong on a hungry dog bent into something else. Tired, fragile, but trusting in me. They wheeled him through swinging doors, and the click of them closing sounded louder than it should have. I sat staring at the second hand of the wall clock, counting each sweep as if it would keep my own chest from cracking open. Minutes blurred until a nurse appeared, calm but firm. "His fever's climbing," she said gently. "We should go now." My hands shook as I picked up the pen, the paper blurring. I signed anyway. And then the door opened, swallowed him whole, and left me with nothing but the echo of my promise and the fear that I'd already failed him. The waiting room felt colder without him beside me, as if the heat vents had given up the second those steel doors closed. Ari, the German Shepherd puppy who had smiled his way through hunger, who had stood in the rain like he belonged nowhere, was somewhere beyond those walls. And all I had was a clipboard full of forms that read less like medical information and more like debt dressed in fine print. Every line I signed was another reminder that this wasn't just about money. It was about commitment. And my hand shook as if it already knew the weight of that promise. Milo sat across from me, tea cooling between his hands, watching with quiet eyes. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. "You could walk away. No one would blame you. Stray dogs come and go in the city every day." His words stung, not because they weren't true, but because I knew how close I had already come to being one of those people who just walked past. I thought about it, how easy it would be to pretend I never saw him, to let him vanish back into the storm forgotten by morning traffic and neon lights. But the truth is, once a dog chooses you, even with a broken body, even with a rotting ear, you don't get to unchoose him. That smile had hooked into my chest and wouldn't let go. The vet pushed through the doors, mask dangling around his neck, eyes serious but calm. "He's stable enough for treatment tonight. We'll sedate him, clean the ears, start antibiotics. The skin will take weeks, maybe months, but we have a chance." He didn't say it would be easy. He didn't need to. I nodded and forced my hand to move across the signature line. It didn't feel like my hand at all. More like someone braver, someone with deeper pockets, someone who couldn't imagine leaving that German Shepherd puppy behind. "Do what you have to," I said, voice rough, every word scraped out of me. "Just bring him back to me." Milo gave a slow nod like he'd seen that moment before, when someone decides to stop being a bystander and steps into the fire. Through the glass window, I caught one last glimpse of Ari being wheeled down the hall, his bandaged ear visible under the thin blanket. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. I whispered his name into the sterile air. Like a prayer, like a promise, the doors swung shut, and the silence that followed was louder than the whole city outside. They called it a partial procedure. I called it a chance, maybe the only one he was ever going to get. At 2:00 in the morning, when the rest of Manhattan was asleep or stumbling home from bars, the vet wheeled him out to me. The German Shepherd puppy who had smiled his way through hunger, was wrapped in a thin blanket, still dazed from anesthesia. His head lolled, his ear carefully bandaged, patches of fur shaved away where infection had been scraped and cleaned. He looked fragile, stitched together like hope itself might unravel him if I breathed too hard. But he was alive. I bent down close enough to hear the whisper of his breathing. His eyes flickered, and with an effort that seemed to cost him everything, he lifted his head a fraction, pressing it into my palm. Heavy, trusting, as if he had handed me all the weight he couldn't carry anymore. My throat tightened. "You're mine now," I told him softly. "Not a doorway, dog, not a shadow. You're home, even if we're not there yet." Milo stood a step back, his weathered face lined deeper by the fluorescent light. He gave a slow smile, the kind that came from someone who had seen too many endings but was glad to witness a beginning. "Guess he chose right," he murmured. I looked at Ori's bandaged head and thought, I hope so. The bill sat on the counter like a second patient, silent and heavy. I slid my card across without daring to glance at the total. Money could be replaced. Lives could not. Ori shifted slightly, letting out a sigh that sounded too much like relief. At sunrise, we walked into the city shelter to make it official. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and tired hands, slid forms across the counter. I filled them out with a steadiness I didn't feel. My signature turned him from stray to family. Just like that, she asked his name without looking up. "Aurelian," I said, "but he'll answer to I." The name felt heavy and golden in the air, like it belonged to him long before I thought of it. She typed it in, stamped the paper, and handed me a receipt and a smile. "Congratulations," she said. "You saved his life." I tucked the papers into my jacket pocket as if they were treasure. At my feet, the German Shepherd puppy curled into a ball of trust and exhaustion, sleeping so deeply he didn't even stir when a chair scraped across the floor. Saved his life, maybe. But as I looked down at him, I felt something I hadn't in years. A shift, a new center pulling me in. I had a feeling he was about to save mine. The only question left was whether his fragile body could carry him through the recovery ahead. The first night home was rougher than I could have ever imagined. I laid out a blanket and tried to make the living room feel less like an apartment and more like safety. But the German Shepherd puppy lay on the rug, as if the floor itself still belonged to the street. Every muscle in his body twitched, his paws jerking as though he were running in his sleep, chased by the ghosts of cold sidewalks and slammed doors. I whispered his name, but it didn't quiet the tremors. Around 2:00 a.m., his breathing shifted. Shallow, quick, too fast. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I pressed my hand against his chest, felt the heat radiating off him. Fever. I grabbed the phone, my voice clumsy as I spoke. "His fever's climbing again. He's not breathing right." They didn't hesitate. "Bring him in now." The cab ride felt endless. Ari curled with his head in my lap, letting out soft whimpers that made every passing traffic light feel like a punishment. Outside, Manhattan neon reflected across the wet glass, painting his bandaged ear in streaks of orange and blue. I kept my face close to his, whispering nonsense. Anything to keep him tethered. "Stay with me, buddy. Just stay." When we burst through the clinic doors, the vet was already waiting, eyes sharp, words clipped. "Secondary infection risk. We'll stabilize him again." My hands shook as I signed another sheet, pen scratching like it could carve my fear into paper. They took him from me, and I watched him disappear behind those swinging doors, his blanket slipping slightly to reveal the scarred curve of his ear. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Milo, soaked through, hat dripping with rain, stood beside me. "Didn't think you'd want to sit alone?" he muttered. His presence steadied me, but my chest still ached like someone had ripped out a piece of me and hidden it in that sterile hallway. I sank into a chair, voice breaking. What if he doesn't make it? Milo didn't flinch. He just looked at me with the kind of quiet faith that comes from years of hard nights. What if he does? The clock ticked past 3. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. All I could think was how Ori had trusted me once. Trusted me enough to step into that leash, enough to lean into my hand. And now the question that burned in me wasn't whether he'd survive. It was whether I was strong enough to deserve that kind of trust. Sunrise brought something I hadn't expected. Hope. After hours of pacing sterile tiles and staring at clocks that refused to move faster, the vet finally walked out. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but a smile cracked through. He stabilized, he said. Infection's under control. He'll need careful care, twice daily meds, cleaning, patience, but he's going to make it. The words hit me like air after being underwater too long. My knees nearly buckled. I closed my eyes and exhaled for what felt like the first time in days, every ounce of tension draining into the floor. When I stepped into recovery, there he was, the German Shepherd puppy who had been nothing but bones, rain, and a too polite smile. Ari lifted his head, slow and heavy, eyes glassy but steady. For a moment, he studied me as if checking whether I was still real. Then, weak as he was, he stretched his tongue and licked my wrist just once before letting it fall back onto the blanket. It was small, but to me, it was everything. The week that followed turned into alarms at odd hours, syringes lined up on the counter, and my phone buzzing with reminders I couldn't afford to miss. Twice a day, I coaxed him to take medicine, whispered encouragement while dabbing antiseptic on the raw patches across his shoulders. Milo kept showing up, dropping off leftovers in foil containers, grumbling about how dogs eat better than janitors before scrubbing my sink full of dishes. Little by little, Ori lifted his head higher each day. He ate. He drank. He even wagged his tail at a nurse who bent down and cooed. He's a sweet boy. Sweet. Sweet was candy. Sweet was a smile from a stranger on the subway. I wasn't just sweet. He was survival. Turned into a tail wag into a look that said, I still believe in people even after all this. By the end of the week, the vet crouched in front of us and said, I think he's ready to go home. My chest tightened. Home. I knelt beside him, brushing a hand over the bandaged ear, whispering into the fur that finally smelled faintly of shampoo instead of the street. We're going home. He stood, shaky, legs trembling like skyscrapers in wind. But when I opened the door, I.E. didn't hesitate. The German Shepherd puppy walked beside me, as though he'd been doing it forever. Out into the city we went together. And as we stepped into the noise and lights, one question kept looping in my mind. How would he handle a world that had once ignored him? And was it ready to see him now? Home wasn't silence. It was a whole new storm he didn't know how to read. The elevator rattled and groaned like it might collapse. Neighbors slammed their doors and shouted up stairwells. Sirens wailed through the night, bouncing between buildings until they felt like they were inside our apartment. The German Shepherd puppy froze at the very first car horn outside. Legs locked, body trembling as if the sound itself were another threat. I knelt beside him, lowering my voice to something steady. It's just noise, buddy. You're safe now. Nothing's coming for you here. So, we practiced. One cautious step into the lobby, his paws sliding against the polished floor. One hesitant step onto the wet sidewalk, the whole city pressing in from above. He would glance back at me every 2 feet, checking again like a kid walking into school on the very first day, unsure if he belonged, needing proof I wasn't leaving him behind. My old Patagonia jacket was soaked through from the drizzle, but I stayed out there with him until the trembling slowed enough for him to sniff a lamppost and mark it like it was a victory flag. A delivery guy rolled past with a golden retriever, pulling at the leash, tail wagging like a banner. The woman holding it gave me a smile. Yours? She asked, nodding toward Ari. I straightened, feeling a strange, deep pride swell in my chest. German Shepherd puppy, I said. 7 months, just came home. She smiled warmer at that, but I barely noticed. I was too caught up in the way Ori leaned against my shin like he was anchoring himself to me, trembling less each time we faced the street together. Progress measured in inches, but progress all the same. That night, though, was another battle. He paced the apartment from wall to wall, nose brushing corners, claws clicking against the old hardwood. He circled the couch twice, sniffed the rug, then backed away as though none of it belonged to him. Finally, he settled by the door, curling tight, his bandaged ear catching the glow from the hallway light that leaked in through the crack. He didn't want to be inside yet. Not fully. He wanted to be ready. Ready to move if he had to. Ready in case the world pushed him out again. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to his restless sighs, and I couldn't shake the question burning through me. Did he think the door might close again? Did he believe this was only temporary? Just another doorway he wasn't allowed to enter? By the second week, Ari began to test the edges of the new world I had given him. It wasn't rebellion. Not really. It was more like he needed to know if the streets still claimed him, if the old life still waited. One evening, just as the city settled into its restless rhythm of honking horns and late-night footsteps, he slipped the leash. It happened so fast. One twist of his collar, one sudden pull, and he was gone. My chest seized like I'd been hit. I sprinted after him, heart hammering, weaving between cabs and startled pedestrians, the sound of tires hissing on wet pavement filling my ears. And then I saw him right back at that same doorway where it all began. The German Shepherd puppy sat there perfectly still, staring at the entrance like a ghost, checking if it still belonged. My lungs burned as I stumbled closer. "Ari!" I gasped, voice breaking on his name. He turned his head at the sound, ears perked, tail twitching low, hesitant. For a second, terror gripped me. What if he went inside? What if he vanished back into that place where I'd almost lost him? But then it happened. He rose, trotted back across the sidewalk, and walked straight into my arms, pressing his wet nose under my chin like he'd never left at all. My knees gave out. I sank to the curb, clutching him so tightly that people stopped to stare. A kababi leaned out his window and shouted at me to move, but the whole city could have stopped in that moment, and I wouldn't have cared. All I could do was hold him, whispering, "You came back. You came back to me." He licked my face, his tail beating against the sidewalk. And in that instant, I understood he wasn't watching the doorway anymore. He was watching me. That night, for the very first time, he didn't curl against the door. Instead, he climbed beside my bed, head heavy on the mattress, breathing deep. I fell asleep with one hand tangled in his fur, afraid to let go, but knowing I wouldn't have to. 3 months later, I thought we were safe. His fur had grown back into a glossy coat that caught the light like burnished bronze. His ear healed into a neat scar that made him look less broken and more like a survivor. His eyes glowed with a life I hadn't seen in that doorway months before. And for the first time, I let myself believe we were through the worst of it. But then the storm came. A sudden crack of thunder split the sky over Manhattan, rattling the windows, making the lights flicker. I, the German Shepherd puppy who had learned to smile through hunger, bolted upright, every muscle rigid, trembling so violently the floor seemed to shake beneath him. He lunged toward the door, claws scraping hard against the wood, desperate to escape. His whole body thrashed against invisible hands only he could feel, like the storm itself was reaching back in time to drag him to the streets again. I grabbed him, wrapping my arms tight around his chest, and his heart slammed against mine in frantic bursts. "It's okay, Ari. It's thunder, not danger. You're safe." But he whined, a broken sound that ripped right through me, a sound that didn't belong in any home. The door burst open, and Milo came running up the stairs, raincoat dripping, eyes sharp with recognition. "He's reliving it," he said, voice low. "The nights outside alone. Storms meant survival back then." Ari's scarred ear twitched as if remembering every cold hour, every night he had pressed himself against a wall for shelter. For a terrible second, I thought I was going to lose him again. Not to infection or weakness, but to fear itself. His whole body shook against me, and I knew that if he broke free, if he bolted into that storm, I might never get him back. I sank to my knees on the rug, pulled him close, pressed my forehead against his, whispering into the space where only he and I existed. "Stay with me. I'm here. I'll never walk past you again. Not ever." It took forever, breath by breath, but slowly his shivers began to ease. His frantic breathing softened, his body heavy again, as exhaustion won over fear. He collapsed against me, chest rising in steadier waves. I held him like an anchor while the thunder rolled away into the distance. Milo stood quietly at the doorway, rain dripping from his cuffs. SP nodded with a kind of wisdom that comes only from years of weathering storms. Sometimes healing isn't just the body, he said softly. I kept my arms locked around Ari, refusing to let go, promising myself in that moment that no storm, inside or out, would ever take him from me again. Belonging didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through the smallest of moments. I, the German Shepherd puppy who had once cowed in a doorway, learned to sit patiently at crosswalks, waiting for the light to change with a seriousness that made strangers smile. He chased squeaky toys down the hallway, like the game had always been his, tail thumping against the walls, echoing down the corridor like laughter. And every night when I came home from work, he rolled onto his back the instant I stepped through the door, paws in the air, grin wide, no longer the apologetic smile of survival, but pure, unfiltered joy. His coat had grown thick and soft, a glossy armor that hid every trace of the streets. The scars were still there, yes, but they told a different story now. A story of resilience instead of neglect. People in the neighborhood began to recognize him. "That's Ai, right?" The rescue, they'd ask, their voices warm. He'd meet them with that same impossible smile he'd once worn to beg for scraps. But now, it wasn't apology. It was belonging. Milo kept dropping by, hat tilted back, always pretending he'd just happened to be in the area. He'd scratch Ori behind the ears and chuckle, "Boss is looking good. Still keeping you in line?" It became our running joke that Ori wasn't just my dog. He was my teacher, my compass, the one giving orders we were both glad to follow. At night, he no longer curled against the door. Instead, he slept beside my bed, head resting on one of my shoes like it was a bookmark, holding our place in the world until morning came. I'd wake sometimes to the sound of his steady breathing and feel more at peace than I had in years. One evening, I caught my reflection in the apartment window. Me standing there, city lights behind, Ori's dark shape pressed against my side. For years, I'd been just another face in the crowd, another man swallowed by the noise of New York. But now, somehow, I was someone who belonged, too. Because of him, I knelt, kissed the scarred ear that had once nearly cost him his life. "We made it, buddy." He let out a long, contented sigh and closed his eyes, safe in the knowledge that this was home. The doorway was behind us now. The future stretched wide and open. But I couldn't stop wondering, what would others see in this journey? Would they understand that sometimes saving a dog isn't the end of the story? Sometimes it's the beginning of saving yourself. I want you to see what I saw. A German Shepherd puppy who once stood shivering in the rain, smiling from hunger, now curled up beside me with his chest rising slow and steady, his heart finally full of trust. His name is Ari, and his story isn't about pain. It's about what happens when someone chooses not to walk past. It's about second chances, about the quiet power of showing up for a life that everyone else overlooked. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. They're the reason doorways stop being shelters and start being beginnings. And I've learned that caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility, it's patience, it's pet care in its truest form. Every share of this story means another dog like Ari gets a chance to be seen, to be chosen, to be saved. Each view, each comment, each moment you take to pass this on is a step toward making sure no puppy waits alone in the rain again. If this story touched your heart, don't just close the video, carry it forward. Help us open more doors, rewrite more endings. Don't forget to subscribe.